Hello everybody and welcome to the Showcast, a series of candid conversations from the world of film brought to you by the Film Verdict and hosted by yours truly, Matt Micucci. Tonight we're diving deep into the shadows, into the eerie and the unexplained as we explore a film that's been creating quite a stir at the 2024 Locarno Film Festival in Switzerland, a little gem called Fréwaka. It's not just a horror film, it's a journey into the depths of Irish mythology and the nation's historical scars. And folks, we've got a treat for you because joining us tonight is the brilliant mind behind this chilling tale, director Aislinn Clarke. Now, Fréwaka takes us to a remote Irish village where a woman is tasked with caring for an agoraphobic elder local and finds herself entangled with some rather sinister, shall we say, entities. But this isn't your typical horror flick, no. This one digs deep, pulling from the rich tapestry of Irish myth and the darker corners of the country's past. In our conversation tonight, we'll be talking with Aislinn about the fascinating blend of mythological and historical threads that weave together in this movie. We'll also get into the significance of the film being an Irish language project, featuring a nearly all-female cast and crew, a powerful statement in itself. And you know, folks, horror isn't just about the scares. We'll be chatting about Aislinn's take on the genre, its ability to communicate, to express the inexpressible, and how for many, it serves as a kind of catharsis. So fire up an Audio Teeny and listen to the audio waves as they fly through the air. This is the Showcast. Hello, Aislinn. Welcome to the Showcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And you're speaking to us from Locarno, where you're presenting Fréwaka at the Locarno Film Festival. So, I mean, first of all, just to break the ice, what's it like over there?
It's gorgeous. It's a really, really beautiful town. It's in the mountains and Lake Maggiore is right there. It's really fantastic. It's a lovely festival and very well run. So, yeah, we're delighted to be here.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a beautiful place. And also it must be amazing to be able to, you know, screen the film at such a major film festival. And I'm looking forward to talking with you about it. But again, to break the ice, this is the first time we talk. And this is what I like to ask the people I speak with generally on this podcast series. Just a simple question, but I'm always curious to find out about what people's early memories of cinema are. So what is your earliest memory of cinema?
Oh, and that's a really interesting question. My dad was a big cinema fan and he did a lot of, you know, we'd rent VHS tapes at the weekend, that kind of thing. So it was a big part of my childhood growing up. I actually remember watching a lot of horror films as a child. Hammer horrors were probably my first introduction. I suppose they're quite mild, really, compared to more modern horror films. But I did see The Exorcist when I was like 7, which was maybe not the most suitable thing in the world. But there was a lot of horror going around in our house. So I think it was probably a Hammer horror, maybe it might be the earliest thing I remember. I was the youngest in the family as well. So I was kind of watching whatever everybody else was watching.
Interesting. So horror was pretty much always part of your life, horror movies and Hammer movies too. I mean, classic stuff. Any titles particularly come to mind? You mentioned one, but are there any others that you'd also might recommend to anyone listening to us right now?
Yes, it is a really interesting period. And it's been a while since I've actually sat down and watched Hammer horrors. One that keeps springing to mind is Daughters of Darkness, I think. All the Dracula ones, which all kind of meld together in my memory. Christopher Lee, of course, being one of the best ever. Count Dracula's kind of hard to get past. Then it's not a Hammer horror film, but I saw it when I was quite young, and it became conflated with them, and that would be The Wicker Man, because it has Christopher Lee again. He's not Dracula, but he's the Lord Summerisle, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of that all together in the subconscious here.
Yeah, and they're all really fascinating films. The Wicker Man too, when you mentioned that, I was, thinking, obviously I watched your film and it kind of follows in that same wave. Actually, as a matter of fact, obviously, like you said, you started watching horror films from an early age. Do you feel like you also awakened to horror films not just being made for the sake of entertainment, but also being able to communicate messages in a very strong, vivid way and unique way?
Yeah, I think horror, it's one of the things that it does really well when it does it well, is kind of give us a way into exploring darker elements of our real lives, trauma, grief, whatever it might be. And in my case, in this film, it's inherited trauma. It's Irish kind of birthright of taking in all the trauma of our ancestors and passing it on forevermore. And there's plenty of it to go around. I think horror is a useful tool for digging into all of that. It kind of offers a useful filter, I suppose, between you're not confronting it too head on. You know, it's not like a documentary or a newspaper article. It gives a softer way in, ironically, you know, kind of, it's strange because horror is when it's done well, it's an unflinching kind of medium, but I think it gives us a way of articulating some of these things without getting too in your face, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I would love to dig deeper into your film because there's so many different elements coming together. Obviously, there's the more horror, visual, creative side. But then, like you said, there's also a whole dimension to the film that draws inspiration from, you know, mythology, but also history. Irish history too. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners, with us, this mythology and this history that has inspired this film.
I think Ireland is a place where there's a lot of myth and superstition. It's like everybody secretly believes in fairies, even if they say that they don't. You know, everybody's worried about someone cutting down a fairy tree or upsetting them in some way. You know, the Nashias, they're called, because they can exact fierce vengeance, as we see in this film. They can be really brutal. And I think it's hard to escape. The religion in Ireland and superstition are so intermingled, and then religion has such a weighty presence in the history of Irish trauma that all of these things kind of naturally dovetail together for me. That's the right way to tell a horror story that's an Irish horror story. And I think you do see that in other Irish horror films too, in films like, you know, A Hole in the Ground or You Are Not My Mother. We're drawing on some of the same well. I think it's the natural way to talk about Irish trauma.
Do you feel there's something cathartic about the whole process of making a film like this?
I think it's very cathartic, actually. I think horror in general is a very cathartic medium. And I think I've said before, horror is for anxious people. The perception is that, you know, you have to be brave or something into horror films, you know, because they're scary. But I think actually it's a very useful outlet for anxiety, because in the world of horror film, everything is controlled. It's going to end at a certain point. There's going to be rules, you know, whereas the real world, I think, is much more terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. There's a couple of things as well that make this film of yours, Fréwaka, particularly unique. And one of them is, of course, the fact that it's in the Irish language. Now, when did you start thinking that this film should be in Oscuelga?
Well, actually, it started as an Irish language film, in that the idea first was, shall we make a horror film in Irish? That's the first conversation, you know, with the producers. And then I set to thinking about how I would do that. What would be a film that should be in Irish rather than any idea translated into Irish? So the whole idea came from the idea of doing a film in Irish. I think the film kind of confronts two Irelands, you know, clashes them with each other. There's the old kind of stultified rural Ireland, and then there's the modern progressive, you know, Shu comes from the city and she's in a same-sex relationship and she's a very modern character. And her and Peg, you know, clash, but they find that they've got more in common, really, than they thought by the end. That's sort of one of the things that I'm exploring there, is confronting one with the other. And it felt like this is basically my vision of what a horror film in Irish should be about, should be dealing with, should be approaching women's trauma in particular, because there's so much of it in Irish history, and woman's perspective on that in a horror film. It just felt like a natural place to go.
Exactly. You know, the cast of this film is almost entirely female cast. So it's quite a significant aspect when we consider the themes that are dealt with in the film and also the narrative itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also a lot of our crew and key creatives were women also. And it's just, I think it's a very Irish woman's story. And I think we haven't had enough of Irish women exploring our own traumas that were distinctively delivered on women as opposed to the whole society, you know. For that reason, it felt natural that we should have as many women as possible and really make it centered on the women's experience.
When preparing for the film, whether it's members of the cast and crew, creatives of this film in general, do you have discussions that maybe go beyond the film itself and maybe talk about a little bit of that trauma that we talked about in our interview, to kind of just have a talk about it before you really dive deep into it in the making of the film?
Yeah, I think it just naturally comes up in conversation anyway, a lot of the time. And in the context of the film and the issues that we're dealing with and so on, we certainly did have those conversations and discussed a lot about the history and how it's being handled and what's being said and so on. Yeah, because it's important to all of us. You know, everyone had a stake in that.
I would love to know about finding the right actors for this film. And this might be a silly question. Was the fact that it is in the Irish language, did that make it a little more difficult or challenging?
They were the right actors for the roles. I think they both did. The leads did a phenomenal job. And it should be a barrier. You know, there are fewer actors. Ireland's a small place to begin with, but then there are fewer actors who can speak Irish fluently. But I wouldn't have wanted to cast the net wider because Claire and Bridge are just absolutely perfect, you know? I didn't feel that I was having to compromise on that. I didn't feel like I was having to impoverish myself with the choices there. And they were both really quickly and easily cast, actually. It's not always the case, but in this film, it was a fairly easy process. I already knew Claire from a previous film called Din in the Comet a couple of years ago that I wrote but didn't direct. So she was just the natural choice. I didn't really look anywhere else either. I just knew that she was Shu, and she really was. She totally inhabited the character. And then Bridge, with the kind of pedigree that she has, the amount of stuff she's done, the presence that she has in Irish theatre in particular, she was just going to be Peg. It was like, once I met her, I was just like, yes, it's going to be Bridge. And I've never worried that I made the wrong choice or anything. They're brilliant.
So this is kind of more related to the filmmaking style, your approach to the horror genre. I'm thinking specifically about the visual style. How do you compile just sequences and ideas and just the imagery that is suitable for any given project? And we can discuss, of course, in detail, Fréwaka here. You know, do you have a notebook? Are you a visual person? How do you note it down? Because I found that there was a very interesting, creative, meticulous attention given to, you know, the buildup of tension and, you know, things like that are, of course, very important in the horror genre.
Yeah, well, I am a visual person. I think most people who love cinema probably are. It sort of starts there. I like to do storyboards as well, to try to, you know, show people what's in my head kind of. But it really comes to life when you have your key creatives, you know, your DP, in this case, Narian Van Mael. Your editor is a massive part of that as well. In this case, that was John Murphy. The production design also, the performances, everything is feeding into that, I guess. And it's a process of discovering it, not just on the shoot, but also in post-production and knitting it all together. So at the storyboard stage, all you can really have is a feeling that you want to impart. It doesn't exist yet. And then all of these different elements come together. And finally, hopefully, you have delivered the feeling that you had to begin with, if you know what I mean. So it's, you have to, when you're making films, you have to trust those creatives because they have such a make or break effect on what you're going to do. If it doesn't work, it's not going to work, you know, both the relationship artistically and personally, I guess. And I was really lucky, so blessed with the key creatives that I had on this project that really helped me to bring it to what it should be, to get it to that point that I, you know, depicting the thing that was in my head from the beginning. I couldn't have done that without them, really. And yeah, they were fantastic.
Sure. And it's very interesting that you do the storyboards yourself. That's not always the case. And I find it's really an interesting aspect of your process there. So
yeah, I don't always do it myself necessarily. Like I have on occasion had other people do storyboards for me, but I will always start with my own little, they might not be the most elegantly drawn storyboards in the world, but I like to start there.
Yeah. And I have to mention as well, the music in this film was particularly great in setting up some of the atmospheres of this film. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was incredible.
Yes, D-Hex, and I should have mentioned her actually already. Absolutely incredible such a gifted, talented composer. I said to her last night after the premiere, actually, it's more like witchcraft what Dee does. And I mean that actually kind of literally, she's so great at evoking something that's intangible and sort of in the bones, and that's really what we have here. So we had long conversations about what I wanted to do in terms of exploring our historical trauma, which we've all inherited. I've inherited it, and so has Dee. And that's the feeling that I wanted to invoke. And we talked about Celtic war horns and all kinds of different things. And Dee is so willing to be very alternative in the approach of how things are scored and composed. There's no kind of quick, easy solutions. So really an absolute privilege. And as you say, very central to how the tension works in the film in the final.
Aislinn, thank you very much for joining us. It's been great chatting with you. I wish you all the best for the remainder of your stay in Locarno and just in general with your film. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was great chatting to you.
Well, cinephiles, that's a wrap on our latest episode of the Showcast. I hope you enjoyed the ride and picked up some fresh insights along the way. Now, don't forget, our love for film doesn't stop here. We've got a whole world of cinematic content waiting for you on our podcast platform. Everything from in-depth conversations to sharp audio reviews. Just head over to filmverdictnetwork.com to dive in, or simply search TFV Network wherever you get your podcasts. There's always something new for you to discover, so be sure to subscribe, tune in, and join the conversation. Till the next time, this is Matt Micucci signing off. See you soon.